Hello everyone, I'm Michael, and today, I'm going to tell you a story. What screams, I'm a bad parent. Story 1. Never saying sorry to the kid when the parents make a mistake. I do this whenever I make a mistake or if I've thought about the action I made and have decided I handled a situation wrong. It usually follows with a conversation with her to be able to understand why I, as the parent, was wrong. My daughter is 5, and I want her to understand that it's okay to be wrong and that parents aren't always right. I also want her to know she can talk to me always, and if I upset her, I damn sure want to know about it. You're the parent, but that open line of communication and understanding is going to help your relationship greatly as they get older. Something happens when she gets older that's serious. They can either hide it, which a lot of kids do, or come to me knowing I'm going to listen, be there, and do everything possible to help make it right. Story 2. I did this with a kid, 10 meters, at my school, who has a very bad home life. I realized I had overreacted to his acting out rather than trying to figure out what was going on with him and helping him process it. So the next day, I sat him down and apologized and told him what I thought I did wrong and how I plan to improve in the future. It made him so uncomfortable, honestly, and I think he sorta cried later, which made me feel even worse. But I realized if he is no model for that kind of behavior, it had to be pretty wild and uncomfortable to experience it. I know if an adult had ever apologized to me as a kid, I would have been wondering what the trick was and how they were gonna fuck me over later. But ultimately, it was the beginning of him opening up more to me and being more trusting of me as a safe resource. He still acted out a lot, but he was more willing to discuss his behavior and how to improve. Apologizing when you make a mistake, because even though you're a big tough adult, you're also a human, is such a big step in showing kids that there can be trust and safety in the world. I hope our relationship of mutual listening and growing helps him in the future. Story 3. If this really screams it, but I absolutely hate when adults tell other adults their children's shameful secrets for no reason. Even strangers. It tells me those children probably don't feel like they can trust their parents. My mom always tells her friends and family my business. It's so fucking annoying and makes me look bad. My mom only tells the part that makes me look bad. Nothing about what she done to make me act the way I do towards her. Family can be some of the most toxic people you can deal with. Every bad thing I ever did was spread around quickly. Even just me starting my period. I specifically asked her not to tell people and she called like 20 people same day. All her friends knew, my whole family, and my friends' parents. Anything good I ever did was rarely praised. And if it was praised privately, never in front of people because you don't need the ego boost. She told me this when I was like 12 and called her on it. And even then it was really just to give herself credit. X, you're a good reader because I'm a good reader. You're bad at math because your dad was bad at math. All of my good qualities were from her. All of my bad qualities were either from my dad or just me being a rotten egg. Story 4. They 100% can't trust their parents and know it. My mom is like that. Would tell my business to anyone who would listen. The best part is when the parents realize their kids don't tell them anything. And then it was my daughter is hiding something and a whole quest to find out what horrible secret I was keeping from them. In reality, I just wanted to be able to have my period without everyone in my life being informed, or something similarly mundane. Shortly after I moved out, I got in a wreck that totaled my car. My mom found out about this a couple years later somehow. Probably one of my friends mentioned it to her, and was incredulous that I didn't tell her about it. I was just like, after a lifetime of you using everything that happens to me as gossip material, why would I make a hard situation even worse by telling you about it? She never did stop doing this or take accountability for it. I haven't spoken to her in about a decade now. It's for the better. Story 5. Blaming your own mistakes and regrets on your kids. Yeah, it's not my fault I was born. It's yours. And the irony of someone who didn't raise the kid properly saying that they were a mistake is even worse. My mother had not intended to get pregnant with me, and yet here I am. Almost every day of my life, I heard that. I wasn't planned. I was unwanted. I ruined my parents' life. My childhood was filled with abuse, and to this day, the parents still blame me for being born and ruining their lives. They also don't understand why I haven't spoken to or seen them in well over a decade. My favorite part is, I would have an older brother, However, he died in childbirth. My mother would always invent these lives he would have had if he survived. In all her versions, he would be an astronaut, or a doctor who cured cancer, or a rich, successful businessman, all the while ignoring her 4 living children all have mental health issues caused by her. A few things that keep coming up. My mother was abused and came from a long line of abusers, so I understand how she was, but I won't forgive it. I've struggled most my life with issues. However, I'm in therapy and still trying, and that's good enough for me. My goal is to outlive my abusers, and the parents are the only 2 left. I can wait. I've got plenty of time. Hopefully this coming new year will bring joy and hope for all of us. Story 6. Making your child think they aren't good enough. Recently, I was rereading some journals from high school, and there were all these entries about things my mom said to me that I don't even remember, but have become an intrinsic part of my insecurity. You'll flunk out of college, get married, have a couple of kids, get a divorce, and struggle for the rest of your life like we are now. You'll never be a scholar. You probably won't even go to college. Good God, Tardis Notary, did God not give you the sense he gave a horse? She's a very broken, toxic woman, and I cut her out of my life years ago. I moved across the country to live with my father's sister, who took me in as the child she never had. I graduated with my bachelor's, my MFA, and now I'm starting my PhD. I'm a published writer and have presented at conferences and worked closely with befriended multiple NYT best-selling authors. I've achieved more at 35 than she has her entire life. Don't let your parents tell you you're worthless or that you're incapable of anything you want to accomplish. Chances are they're bitter, damaged people who are jealous of the success and potential you have. Off the back of that, the parents who instill the false belief in their child that there's only one way to be successful in life, academic, financial, for example. There are all kinds of success, and what may be success to you may not be success to me. We're all individuals, after all, with our own desires and preferences. These don't particularly apply to me, but further examples, I might see it as a success to break away from the toxicity and narcissism of my parents' behavior by unlearning all of their negativity and raising my kids better. I might see leaving my home country and traveling the world to get a better understanding of other cultures as success instead of having a bigger savings account. I might see following my dreams, even if it isn't financially rewarding, as successful because at least I enjoy what I'm doing despite not being wealthy. We should be teaching our children simply to be sensible, responsible, happy, and well-rounded individuals who can find joy in anything. Whatever else they choose to do with their life, whatever path they take, that's their choice because it is their life. Story 7. Using them as props gain for your YouTube channel. Those XYZ family channels make me so sad for the kids and angry at the parents. They turn every event into a scripted over-the-top drama that makes their lives seem ridiculously eventful. They basically run a family business now, which would be fine if it were all adults. But the kids are definitely employees generating large revenue for the company. My kid watched some for a while, and then started asking stuff like, "Dad, why don't we get tornadoes? Or build a 100-foot water slide or go to Barbados like the X family?" Thinking their overly dramatic videos were real life. They all got banned from our house. Story 8. Demeaning your children as means of punishment. My son's father is constantly demeaning our 5-year-old child to the point he doesn't want to spend prolonged periods of time with him. We are obviously not together, never married, and my son has sensory issues to top it off. He makes fun of him for flapping his arms, calls him a crybaby, when he's been told by a professional our son is not a teasable child. Reading about all these fathers wanting to desperately see their children really makes me sad, not only for you guys, but my son, because his father lives close enough to see him as often as he'd like, but never does. Then complains he spends no time with our son. He didn't even wish him a Merry Christmas today, via phone, nothing. I can't wrap my head around how you could treat your own flesh and blood this way. My son is the most lovable, sweetest kid, so it's really heartbreaking, and makes it really difficult not to parent out of guilt sometimes. Story 9. Your own children being afraid of you. No child should be afraid of the person that looks after them nearly 24/7. My dad was shocked when I decided to walk almost 10 miles, barefoot, past road work being done, to the hospital my mom's sister were, at 11 p.m. on a school night, because I, a 14-year-old at the time, didn't want to stay with him as he dragged me around the house because I didn't have my chores done. I had been working on a school project for 6 hours and hadn't cleaned the 7,000 square feet house to spotlessness by myself before. He got home from work at 10 p.m. I had been cleaning for an hour and was in the process of completing the chores when he got home. But that wasn't good enough for him. Examples of expected tasks: dust off the top of the baseboards, scrape rust dirt off floor of the basement where the hot water heater was leaking, use raw bleach to chemically clean the concrete on the back patio. He later made me do this without gloves or any protective gear. I had chemical burns on my hands and arms for 3 weeks, pics of which were used during my parents' divorce. Do the dishes. This I had actually done, but since he ate later and put new dirty dishes in the sink, it was somehow my responsibility when he saw them after getting enraged. So imagine the 6'200+ man yelling at the top of his lungs at a 14-year-old at 11 p.m. for not having chores done. Yeah, I didn't even stoop down to grab my shoes as I ran out the door. Could've, but I was in such a state of panic and distress that I didn't even consider it. Still dealing with that trauma to this day. Can't even go barefoot anymore because the feeling of loose stones, gravel under my feet reminds me of the hot pavement tar that I walked through and was stuck to my feet for a week, trying to get to my mom. Anyways, that's enough trauma dumping for Christmas. Back to holly and jolly with the family. Story 10. Zero interest in the kid. Doesn't care what they do or what happens to them as long as they don't inconvenience them. About 10 years ago, I dealt with this exact problem. At the time, I had a job mentoring kids who had gotten kicked out school for various things. I had a 14-year-old kid I worked with who was constantly getting into fights and burning every bridge he crossed. He and I developed a decent rapport, and I never had an issue with him. But his mother, that's a different story. I tried to explain to her my plan for getting him some structure and getting his temper and impulses under control, and pretty much the only thing she did was roll her eyes and say, "Whatever, I do what you need to do so long as I don't have to get involved because I don't care." The kid said that his mom had never given a shit about him. Her attitude was she fed him, gave him a room, and only did whatever the bare minimum she needed to do to not get charged with neglect. But that was it. She cared about herself and nothing else. If he got in trouble, she didn't care, unless the trouble required her to leave the house and meet with school officials or cops. Then, she'd get angry, but not for whatever he did, but because what he did made people bother her when she wanted to be left alone. Story 11. Yelling at the kid for every trivial thing. My parents used yelling as the default method of communication. The only two people in my house who could ever have a conversation that didn't devolve into yelling were me and my dad, though he still yelled a lot. It was kinda tragically funny that I could hear a basic conversation start between my mom and sister and set a time for 60 seconds, and they would be yelling by then, each saying their thing a bit louder than the other until it was a screaming match over nothing. Having moved out 10 years ago, sometimes I still sit back and enjoy the silence. Story 12. When I was maybe 9, we lived in some apartments one night. I heard a baby crying and crying, but it sounded like it was outside. I looked out my window and saw a man holding a pillow over a baby's face trying to kill it. I freaked out and told my mom, and she called the cops. Years later, I met a woman with a child who had very severe delays mentally and physically, and she is telling me the story of how she got away from her abusive ex-husband. In an odd series of coincidences over 20 years later, I reconnected with my neighbor from those apartments. That was the worst thing I have ever seen in my life. Story 13. Not correcting your kids. Holy shit. Just finished hosting a Christmas get-together. One of the guests brought her 4-year-old. She was an absolute nightmare, running around the house, breaking things, making random noise on my instruments, sneaking upstairs, opening the bedroom doors, all but the master don't have locks, and messing with the stuff inside, hiding various objects, remotes around the house, rummaging through other people's presents, etc. When she went somewhere she shouldn't be at, the mother would either not do shit or would just say, "Hey, you can't be there," a couple times and do nothing else. When my bro and I had to step in, gently asking the child to come downstairs, she would throw tantrums, and the mom would still do nothing. We're currently up at 1 a.m., looking for a remote for some Christmas lights that she hid away somewhere. We called the mom about it and she went check the trash. She throws things away sometimes, Supervise your goddamn children, especially when you're in public or in someone else's home. They're your responsibility, and other people shouldn't have to deal with the bullshit that comes with it just because you don't feel like dealing with it yourself. Literally nobody my parents know seems to understand this, and we've had shit broken in our house several times. Story 14. Ironically, never thinking you're a bad parent. Oh man, so I've got a great relationship with my parents and grandparents. I see my parents at least once a week, and most weeks also at my grandparents'. We're all very close, but I'll say that we are a quite small family. Anyways, I consider my mom to be an excellent mom. She and my dad raised me and my sister to understand boundaries, said no to us, could deal with tantrums by taking us outside and waiting until we stopped, appropriate punishments, taught us manners, but also would show us that they loved us, all that stuff. In my 20s, she'd occasionally say, "Oh, I wasn't such a good mother," and I honestly couldn't believe what she was saying. It'd be some mild little thing like she'd forgotten about a sports game or misplaced something of ours or whatever. Minor little things that didn't matter and were obviously going to happen because she's human. I think she still thinks that she screwed me and my sister up, even though we're both doing well, gainfully employed, healthy, self-sufficient, drug-free, except occasional alcohol, and happy. What's weird is, I've heard her stories about her parents, and her parents weren't great parents. She's far, far, far better than they were. I would have thought that she'd at least be able to see the contrast.